The cold hit me first, a physical punch to the lungs that stole my breath. It wasn't just cold, it was an ancient, bone-deep chill that seemed to hum through the very air. My breath plumed out, instantly freezing into crystals that shimmered in the weak, distant light. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the edge of the world, where everything dies. The silence here, it's not just an absence of sound, it's a presence. A heavy, suffocating blanket that presses down, making my own heartbeat sound like a thunderclap. And then there was the feeling, that undeniable, crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like something was watching, waiting. I told myself it was just the isolation, playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew. The white silence wasn't empty. It was holding something, and it was hungry. My eyes darted across the endless expanse of snow and ice. Every shadow seemed to shift, every distant drift a potential hiding place. The air was so still, it felt like it was holding its breath with me. We were supposed to be studying ice core samples, charting ancient climates. Dr. Eris, my mentor, had called it the purest data on Earth. Now, the data felt secondary to survival. The storm had hit us 3 days ago, a sudden, brutal whiteout that swallowed our camp whole. When it finally cleared, the others were gone. Just me, the tattered remnants of a tent, and a radio that only hissed static. The horizon was a seamless blend of white sky and white ground, broken only by the occasional jagged tooth of an ice formation. But it wasn't the emptiness that disturbed me most. It was the tracks. Not animal tracks, not human. These were different, too wide, too deep, with an uneven, dragging quality. They crisscrossed the snow around what was left of our camp, leading off into the blinding distance. They hadn't been there before the storm. I strained my ears, trying to pierce the suffocating quiet. The wind had died down to almost nothing, leaving only the faint, high-pitched whine of the cold itself. Then a sound. Not a roar, not a growl, but a kind of scrape, like something vast and heavy being dragged over ice, far, far away. It was barely audible, swallowed by the distance, yet it resonated deep in my chest. My breath hitched. I spun around, scanning the featureless landscape, but saw nothing, just the endless, unforgiving white. The isolation was a poison seeping into my thoughts. Was I imagining things? Was the cold finally breaking my mind? Dr. Eris always warned about Arctic madness, the way the emptiness could twist perception. But this felt too real. The tracks, the sound, they weren't delusions. They were evidence. Evidence of something I couldn't comprehend, something that had moved through our camp while I was huddled, half frozen in the storm. I forced myself to move, my legs stiff and aching. I needed to check the supply cache, what little remained. As I approached the snow-buried crates, something caught my eye. A glint of metal half buried in the snow near where Dr. Eris's personal tent had been. I knelt, my fingers numb as I brushed away the snow. It was his compass, but it wasn't just dropped. It was bent, crushed, as if by immense force, and etched into the frozen ground beside it, deep enough to have resisted the wind, was a symbol. A crude, jagged spiral, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It felt ancient, malevolent. My blood ran cold, colder than the Arctic air. This wasn't just a storm. This wasn't just animal predation. Something had been here, and it had left a message. My blood ran cold, colder than the Arctic air. This wasn't just a storm. This wasn't just animal predation. Something had been here, and it had left a message. The jagged spiral seemed to pulse in the dim light, a stark, dark wound on the pristine white. It wasn't just etched, it felt carved with a force that defied the frozen earth. My fingers, numb as they were, instinctively recoiled from it. What kind of thing could do this? Crush solid metal like paper and then leave a deliberate mark? It wasn't a warning, not exactly. It felt like a signature, a declaration of presence. I scrambled back, my eyes darting from the symbol to the surrounding snow, then to the distant, featureless horizon. The silence, which had been heavy, now felt malicious. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get away from this place, from this thing. But where would I go? There was nowhere. Just an endless, empty expanse, which suddenly didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt like a cage. I forced myself to breathe, shallow, ragged gasps that burned in my lungs. The compass. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The casing was indeed buckled, the glass shattered, but the needle was still there, bent almost 90 degrees, pointing not north, but directly into the ground beneath the spiral. It was as if whatever crushed it had also used its magnetic properties to warp its very purpose. Or maybe it was trying to tell me something about what lay beneath the surface. My gaze drifted from the compass to the tracks again, the ones I'd dismissed as just different. Now, in the context of the crushed metal and the malevolent symbol, they took on a terrifying new meaning. Too wide, too deep, with that uneven, dragging quality. They weren't just tracks, they were gouges, like something impossibly heavy had been pulled across the snow, leaving a trough in its wake. And they led away from the camp, directly into the blinding white. A new sound, faint but distinct, pierced the suffocating quiet. A low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the ice beneath my feet. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the scrape I'd heard before. This was deeper, more resonant, like distant thunder, but without the storm. It seemed to come from the direction the tracks led. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the vast emptiness. This wasn't Arctic madness, this was real, and it was getting closer. Panic surged, cold and sharp, threatening to overwhelm me. I needed to move. I needed to find a weapon, find shelter, find something. My eyes scanned the pathetic remnants of our camp. A few scattered crates, torn canvas, a broken shovel. Nothing, absolutely nothing that could stand against whatever left that symbol and made that sound. My breath plumed out, instantly freezing, and for a terrifying second, I thought I saw a faint, dark shape in the swirling vapor just at the edge of my vision. A shadow that wasn't quite a shadow, something that moved against the stillness. I blinked, and it was gone. Just the endless, unforgiving white. But the feeling of being watched was no longer a sensation. It was a certainty. It was here, with me, and it was waiting for me to make my next move. The certainty of being watched was a physical weight pressing down on me, colder than the Arctic air itself. Every nerve ending screamed, every instinct shrieked, "Run!" But where? My eyes frantically scanned the featureless landscape, trying to re-find that fleeting shadow, that impossible dark shape. Was it just my mind, frayed by isolation and terror, conjuring phantoms? Or was it real? The endless white offered no answers, only swallowed questions, leaving me suspended in a suffocating void. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the immense quiet. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, trying to ground myself, to think. Panic was a rising tide, threatening to drown what little rationality I had left. The rumbling sound intensified then, no longer distant thunder, but a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the soles of my boots, up my legs, into my very bones. It was a low, primordial hum, like some colossal engine buried deep beneath the ice, stirring to life. And it was closer, much closer. The tracks, they led directly towards that sound. My mind, despite its terror, began to piece together a horrifying picture. The crushed compass, the ancient symbol, the impossible tracks, the deep rumble. Whatever this was, it wasn't just passing through. It was here. It had been here, and it was coming back. I needed to move, now. But where? The pathetic remains of our camp offered no concealment, no defense. A shattered crate wouldn't stop a polar bear, let alone whatever left those gouges in the snow. My gaze fell upon the largest ice formation near our former camp, a jagged, wind-sculpted spire that rose perhaps 20 feet high. It wasn't much, but it was better than standing exposed in the open. A desperate hope flickered. Maybe I could get a better view, see what was making that sound before it saw me. Or maybe, just maybe, I could find a crevice, a small shelter, anything to break the line of sight. My legs, stiff and protesting, propelled me forward. Each step was a monumental effort, the snow crunching underfoot, a deafening sound in the otherwise absolute silence. My eyes darted constantly, scanning the horizon, half expecting to see some colossal alien form emerge from the whiteout. The rumbling grew louder, a deep, resonant groan that seemed to reverberate from the very core of the world. It was no longer just a sound, it was a physical pressure, a low-frequency wave that pressed against my eardrums, making my head ache. As I neared the ice spire, a new detail emerged from the featureless expanse. The tracks. They weren't just leading away from the camp. They were leading to something. A dark, irregular shape, barely discernible against the distant white, but growing steadily larger. It was low to the ground, massive and utterly still. It wasn't an ice formation. It wasn't a natural part of this landscape. My blood ran colder than before, if that were even possible. The rumbling subsided slightly, replaced by an eerie, profound quiet that felt even more menacing. I ducked behind the spire, pressing myself against the rough, freezing ice, my breath fogging violently. My heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I risked a peek around the edge. The dark shape was clearer now, too large to be an animal, too irregular to be a rock. It looked broken. Like a colossal ancient machine, half buried in the snow, its surface pitted and scarred. And then I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer, a ripple in the air just above its surface. And the tracks, those impossible dragging gouges, led right up to its side, disappearing beneath its bulk. This wasn't just a place of observation, it was a place of arrival and departure. A sudden, sharp crack echoed across the plain, not the wind, not ice shifting, but something else. It was metallic, resonant. It came from the direction of the dark shape. And then, slowly, agonizingly, a portion of the massive dark mass began to shift. A deep, grinding sound, like tectonic plates scraping together, filled the air, growing louder, more insistent. My eyes widened in terror. It wasn't broken. It was waking up. And I was hiding barely 100 yards away. The grinding sound ripped through the air, a raw metallic shriek that grated on my very soul. It wasn't just noise, it was a physical force, vibrating through the ice, through my bones, shaking my teeth. The dark shape, so recently still, was now in agonizing, colossal motion. A massive section, previously indistinguishable from a snow-covered ridge, began to rise. Slowly, with an unbearable slowness that stretched every second into an eternity, it peeled back, not machinery, not rock, but something far, far worse. It was organic, yet utterly unnatural. A vast, chitinous shell, the color of ancient, bruised ice, gleamed dully in the weak Arctic light. It was segmented, like some monstrous insect, but on a scale that defied comprehension. As it lifted, a chasm of shadow opened beneath it, a dark maw from which the grinding emanated. And then, from within that cavernous opening, a series of limbs or appendages began to articulate. They were thick, jointed, ending in blunted, claw-like protrusions that scraped against the ice with a sound like 1,000 nails dragging across a chalkboard. These were the tracks, these were the gouges, this was what had moved through our camp. My breath caught in my throat, a frozen knot of terror. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against the overwhelming silence that punctuated the entity's movements. It was emerging, not from beneath the ice, but from within itself, like some grotesque, self-contained hibernation chamber. The air around it shimmered, not from heat, but from some indescribable distortion, a ripple in reality itself. As more of the colossal form revealed itself, I saw them. Eyes. Not like any eyes I'd ever seen. They were not singular, but clusters of pinprick lights, a constellation of malevolent ice-blue points that flickered across its segmented head. And they were turning, slowly, deliberately, scanning the desolate landscape. My blood ran colder than the Arctic air, colder than the deepest ice. It was looking, it was searching, and I was directly in its line of sight, pressed against this pathetic spire of ice, utterly exposed. The grinding ceased abruptly, leaving an echoing, profound silence that was even more terrifying than the noise. The blue pinprick eyes, hundreds of them, all swiveled in unison. They weren't just searching anymore. They were focused on me. A low, resonant thrum, different from the earlier rumble, began to emanate from its immense form. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a vibration that resonated deep within my chest, a frequency that felt designed to unravel my very being. It was a sound of immense power, of ancient hunger. It was the sound of a predator finally locking on to its prey. One of the colossal appendages, thicker than a tree trunk, began to move. Slowly, ponderously, it lifted from the ice, casting a long skeletal shadow that stretched towards my hiding place. It was testing the air, feeling for me. The bluffed claws at its end, the ones that had crushed Dr. Aris's compass, the ones that had carved that symbol into the frozen earth, were now reaching for me. Panic, raw and absolute, seized me. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to flee, to disappear. But where? There was nowhere to go. The creature was gargantuan, its shadow already eclipsing the ice spire. I was a tiny, insignificant speck against its monstrous scale. My legs, which had been frozen with terror, now threatened to give out completely. The appendage moved faster now, not a lunge, but a slow, inexorable sweep, like a scythe cutting through the air. The pinprick eyes, those cold blue lights, seemed to bore into my soul, stripping away any last vestige of hope. I could feel the displacement of air as it approached, a gust of frigid, ancient wind. It was coming for me. It had found me. I pressed myself harder against the ice, my eyes squeezed shut, a choked cry caught in my throat. This was it. This was the end. The white silence hadn't just held something, it had held a nightmare, a horror beyond human comprehension, an ancient, hungry thing that had awoken. I could feel the cold, metallic, organic scent of it, a faint, acrid tang in the air. The vibrations intensified, shaking my very teeth. I could almost feel the shadow of its enormous claw-like hand falling over me. I was trapped. I was going to be another set of tracks, another crushed compass, another forgotten whisper in the dreadful echoes of the Arctic. The shadow consumed me. The crushing weight of its presence, the guttural thrum vibrating through my very bones. It was the prelude to oblivion. I braced for the end, for the blunted claws to close around me, for the ancient hunger to claim its due. But the impact never came. Instead, the pressure lessened, the vibration receded. I dared to open my eyes. The colossal appendage, still thicker than any tree, was retracting. The constellation of blue eyes, hundreds of them, were no longer fixed on me. They were turning, slowly, deliberately, towards the distant horizon, towards the endless white from which it had emerged. The grinding sound returned, a deep, resonant sigh. The massive, chitinous form began to contract, to fold in on itself, sinking back into the snow, becoming once more that dark, irregular shape, a mere ripple in the vast, deceptive emptiness. It didn't leave. It just retreated, not out of fear, not out of mercy, but as its brief, terrifying awakening was complete, its purpose for the moment fulfilled. Perhaps I was simply too small, too insignificant, a mere curiosity it had decided to disregard. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, pressed against the frozen spire, my body screaming, my mind shattered. The silence that followed was an abyss, deeper and more terrifying, for now I knew what lurked within it. When I finally dared to move, my limbs were leaden, each step a testament to a will I didn't know I possessed. I stumbled away from that place, driven by a primal terror. I don't know how I made it back. Days blurred into a nightmare of wind and snow. They found me eventually, half-frozen, incoherent, babbling about things that couldn't be. They called it Arctic madness, a coping mechanism for trauma. I let them. How could I explain the impossible scale, the ancient eyes, the raw living horror that slept beneath the ice? Now the world is different. Every shadow holds a secret, every silence a threat. The cold still hits me, but it's not just the air. It's the memory of that ancient bone-deep chill, the hum of a presence that never truly leaves. The white silence isn't empty, it's just waiting. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that it will wake again. Have you ever felt that watching presence, that ancient cold clinging to the edges of your perception? Have you ever heard the dreadful echoes of something truly vast, truly alien, stirring in the quiet places of the world? I have, and I'll never be free.